got some guts, don't you?
Was ist denn das?
Well, look, it's all or nothing. It's all been leading to this. Let's move.
This is one of the games on the list that I kind of suck at, but I still love to pieces. The manga-style presentation, satisfying tactics-based gameplay, and satisfying narrative are what have always stuck out to me, not the frustration of being stuck on a certain level. Valkyria Chronicles is a strategy RPG hybrid the likes of which I've never experienced before or since, and it's why it's sometimes hard to get newcomers on board. It's turn-based in the sense that the player and the enemy operate in turns, but it's a real-time strategy game in the sense that the player moves and shoots with each character in real time, sometimes on the receiving end of enemy gunfire. It's an RPG in the sense that there's experience to be gained and stats to be leveled up, but the individual characters don't level up. The classes of Scout, Shock Trooper, Engineer, Lance, and Sniper as a whole do. Valkyria Chronicles doesn't feel like it even could be a huge 30 to 40 hour RPG, but it has enough going on under the hood to make it engaging enough for the player to stick around for that long. This is a game that takes a while to reach its full potential, but the distinct visual style and unique gameplay make Valkyria Chronicles something worth staying with until it does. This 90s PS1 classic isn't something I experienced until very recently, sometime last year I believe. But even with years of age and advances in game design, I knew what I was playing was something truly iconic. Age hasn't slowed Symphony of the Night down one bit. This is the game that split Castlevania into two eras, the old school era and the Metroidvania era. There's a reason Castlevania shares a genre name with a legendary game like Metroid, and it's because even though Metroid may have popularized the idea of a non-linear side-scroller, Symphony of the Night is the game that perfected it by melding it with RPG mechanics and a visually stunning aesthetic. Dracula's Castle has always been presented as a huge physics-defining behemoth of a structure, which means it lends itself perfectly to an adventure game with an emphasis on exploration rather than difficulty. It may have been the game that separated the Castlevania franchise, but as history looks back at this great franchise, it's impossible not to appreciate everything Castlevania Symphony of the Night does well. As someone who's always had a greater interest in the gothic horror of Castlevania rather than the science fiction of Metroid, Symphony of the Night is a game I didn't know would click with me as much as it did until I finally sat down and experienced its brilliance. On a Vita, too.
Your words are as empty as your soul. Mankind ill needs a savior such as you.
What is a man? A miserable little pile of secrets. But enough talk. Have at you!
Yakuza has always been a relatively niche franchise within the gaming industry, and it still is to a degree. But with Yakuza 0, the series went from an unknown quantity to a potent force in the minds of players around the world. It wasn't just this weird, quirky game that only a select few swore by anymore. The opportunity presented by a prequel set the slate clean for any newcomers to finally dive in. Since it lies at the beginning of the series' chronology, anyone can jump in and have a decent understanding of the characters and plot, coming to know and love them just as series veterans had for years. Not only is 0 the perfect jumping on point, It's the epitome of a perfect prequel that has real tension and real surprises surrounding certain characters that we know make it out. Zero completely recontextualizes characters like Nishiki and Majima that make their future appearances all the more meaningful. And as a Yakuza series tradition, it features yet another immersive depiction of city life in Japan, but this time set in the 1980s, complete with citizens trying to wrap their heads around newfangled ideas like portable phones, the economic boom, and more. The era is so accurately represented and parodied at the same time. Yakuza 0 is a masterpiece not only for the series' standards, but by gaming standards as a whole. And yeah, it still has that Yakuza goofiness.
素直に I love you 届けようきっと You love me 伝わるさ君に似合うガラスの靴を探そう
The massacre was only the beginning. Who did this to us? Who attacked the tribe?
For a sprawling open-world action RPG to be made completely for the ground up as an exclusive, that takes some serious faith. Faith in the developer to make something special, and faith in the market to flock to it and make it profitable. PlayStation had faith in Guerrilla Games, and it paid off big time. Horizon Zero Dawn isn't a game that looks like it could have possibly been made by a team most known for gritty first-person shooters, but here we are. Aloy, the protagonist, is one of the faces of the PS4, and fans are clamoring for any information on its inevitable sequel. Post-apocalyptic RPGs aren't a new concept, but Horizon Zero Dawn's spin on an end-of-the-world scenario is what gives it its striking identity. Horizon is a brand new franchise, and the first entry does an incredible job of setting up a world rich with lore and character, with ominously familiar locations worth exploring almost solely for trying to piece together the mystery of what happened in the past. Horizon's dual narrative of past and present is helped by its pulse-pounding bow and arrow-centered combat, and that's where Guerrilla's Killzone pedigree really reveals itself. Horizon doesn't do one thing well, it does just about everything well, and that's why Horizon Zero Dawn is a modern classic. There are only a handful of games I'd consider myself proficient at, and Counter-Strike Global Offensive is not one of them. But I love it anyway. Counter-Strike has always been a ruthlessly difficult game that absolutely requires the player to be on their A game, making smart plays, having pinpoint accuracy, and memorizing map layouts. The last part of that list is definitely helped by the iconic and memorable maps from across the series, like Dust. CSGO is almost like a Counter-Strike greatest hits album. It doesn't do a whole lot remarkably different than Source or even 1.6, but it brings together everything that makes these games special under one unified banner. I'm not a Counter-Strike pro by any means, so I can't attest to things like hitbox differences or time to kill changes, but what I do know is that some of my most memorable gaming experiences have come from CSGO and its ever-present community. Even though sometimes it definitely seems like the CSGO community is toxic and intimidating, for some reason hearing and seeing people act like complete goofballs either over a mic or in the in-game chat always enhances the experience. There's almost always someone doing some kind of bit, and that alone honestly makes the game worth it. What I remember most about CSGO isn't some sick op kill or being match MVP, it's the people I've encountered.
We are many, you are but one.
You'll learn respect.
Growing up, I was always the most squeamish kid at school. Any sight of blood and I was either passed out or crying. I don't know when in life I changed from the kid who couldn't stand to see a drop of blood to someone who relishes in playing stuff like Mortal Kombat, but I'm not complaining. Mortal Kombat was like my initiation into adulthood. I was finally playing the big boy stuff. This wasn't Call of Duty rated M for mature, this is the game that defines what M for mature means. Mortal Kombat is a name that carries a lot of weight, and if the game itself wasn't as remarkable as it was, then that weight wouldn't have meant much. MK9, the game's colloquial title, was a return to form for Mortal Kombat, almost literally. It finally returned to its 2D roots. MK9 isn't just an important game for me personally, but also for the fighting game genre, essentially saying it's okay. You don't have to be in 3D to be successful. The resurgence of the fighting game genre can in large part be traced back to MK9's success. Gone are the days of comically large character rosters, with some exceptions like Smash Bros. Ultimate, but in its place is a focus on squeezing as much life as possible from a colorful cast of characters, and there's almost no cast as colorful as Mortal Kombat's. Many franchises try to grow with their audiences, and Nintendo learned the hard way with Wind Waker that the Legend of Zelda crowd didn't want to stay young forever. They wanted a Zelda game that actually looked as good as Ocarina of Time did in their imaginations. Twilight Princess is the culmination of what was a 6-year-old promise, a realistic adult Legend of Zelda game on GameCube. It's hard for me to look at Twilight Princess and not write it off as just the edgy Zelda game, but the more I think about it, the more I realize just how much this game has impacted me and has continued to do so over the years. This and Majora's Mask are often considered to be the dark horses of the franchise, featuring way darker tones than what someone might normally expect. Twilight Princess goes a little further than Majora's Mask, though. Majora's Mask is permeated with the feeling of finality, of death. Twilight Princess is more about the fragility of the human spirit, about the weakness of people faced with overwhelming odds. Twilight Princess is a bit more existential than reflective. It took guts for Nintendo to publish this game, but their faith in their audience's maturity has been well rewarded, and history has looked back on Twilight Princess with more positivity than I'd initially expect. No, not that Most Wanted. Not yet. 2012's Most Wanted sharing its name with the 2005 classic may have put a bad taste in many people's mouths initially, but I think once this game is looked at more as a spiritual successor to Burnout Paradise than a remake of Most Wanted, the perspective changes a little bit. There's an open world, police chases, and a blacklist, and that's about all it has in common with the original. But what Most Wanted 2012 does instead is use the framework of the original and inspiration from Burnout to make a unique open world racing experience. Most Wanted 2012 is about experimentation, about dynamic gameplay. Players can change cars and parts mid-police chase, and that basically says it all right there. In a way, now that I really think about it, Most Wanted 2012 is a bit of a precursor to the more modern qualities of racing games, like having an emphasis on flexibility and social connectivity. Just about any car can be taken anywhere. Mistakes can be made and the player won't need to reset the race. I'm not saying that without Most Wanted 2012, we wouldn't have Forza Horizon 4, but I am saying that Most Wanted 2012 is like if Forza Horizon 4 had already existed in 2012.
Where's our money? Do you have my bag? Always, Dutch.
The magic of Red Dead Redemption 2 lies in its incredible attention to detail. It's slow, really slow. A common analogy for Red Dead Redemption 2 is that it's more of a book or TV show than a movie, and it's evident in the fact that most of Red Dead Redemption 2's narrative significance comes from character interaction during something as simple as a horse ride during a mission. Tiny, seemingly meaningless conversations can completely recontextualize certain characters and their motivations. Arthur Morgan isn't a typical protagonist. His performance has a lot of subtle nuance to it that makes him feel like a real, living and breathing human being. In fact, just about everyone does. Almost every action in Red Dead Redemption 2 has a reaction. This game actively fights back at the player, which can make it hard to dick around and kill NPCs for fun. In fact, even if killing NPCs is the player's idea of fun, the game actively makes it hard because every single person feels so authentic and real. When I point a gun at someone in Red Dead Redemption 2, I can feel the weight of the life I have in front of me. What other game on this list can I say that about?
Listen to me. We don't want to kill any of you. But trust me, we will. Wake them up a little!
Hotline Miami has influenced my creative thinking in a ton of different ways. Hell, I even made a terrible student film about Hotline Miami that I will never show anyone. Regardless, the sleek 80s neon aesthetic is a stark contrast to the comical amounts of gore, but that's what makes Hotline Miami so unique. It essentially invented the idea of the violent retrowave aesthetic. Hotline Miami is one of those games that makes the player question how they experience gaming. It feels good to be bad, but why? Hotline Miami presents its thesis statement in its opening moments. The pixel art style doesn't change the fact that the player does some absolutely horrendous things in Hotline Miami, but the game never really explains the meaning behind the anarchy until the player puts the puzzle pieces together or looks up the plot online. And suddenly, it all makes sense, and I really don't know if the reality of the situation makes Jacket's actions worse or better. It's an adrenaline-fueled test of perseverance, but one with a story unlike anything out there, film, game, or otherwise. Something in Hotline Miami will change the person who plays it, be it the tone, aesthetic, the story, or the gore.